What's good, everybody? It's Keylime here with another PTR first look. This time we're going to be focusing in on the Necromancer. We've got a brand new set and some legendary upgrades. Let's check out that bad boy right now. It's the Masquerade of the Burning Carnival. Whatever that means, that's the craziest set name ever. But here we are with the new Necro Season 21 set that was introduced, and it's all around simulacrums and bone spear damage, which sounds pretty hot. Let's check out the bonuses before I jump into all the weird mechanics of it all. So the two-piece bonus here is that your simulacrums don't take damage, they get access to all of the runes, and the cooldown is refreshed when you die. So if you die, you can just immediately cast them again, you don't have to worry about cooldown, so that part's kind of nice. The 4-piece is tons of damage reduction. So you get 50% damage reduction whenever your simulacrums are out. So just straight up 50% right there. But then it essentially has unity with your other simulacrums. So your simulacrums are taking a split of all your damage. And there's two of them because one of the runes with simulacrum is that it creates two of them. So you've got two people each sharing 50% damage with you, plus you have 50% damage by yourself. So the amount of tankiness you get just by having the set complete, like with the 4-piece bonus, is really, really nice. On top of that, the 6-piece bonus here is that your Bone Spear is going to be doing just a straight up 10,000% increase in damage. The weirder thing though is that your simulacrums are getting essentially a 30,000% increase in their damage. So you have two people standing right next to you as like your little sentries, these little mobile skeleton sentries, and they're doing way more damage than you are. So their existence is extremely important. So this leads me to the part of the video that I want to focus in a little bit on, which really makes this set awkward to use and not so great. Let's take a closer look at all of those runes we actually got access to when it came to Simulacrum. So if you remember, the 2-piece bonus is giving us all of the runes. So all of your curses are applied if they ever apply at all, so that's great. You get double the amount of essence as you normally would, great. This is where the problem comes in, self-sacrifice. So if you yourself are about to die, it kills your simulacrums and you are fully healed. This kind of kills the entire build for me because I want my final service to be the thing that triggers when I'm about to die and my simulacrums are fine. But because self-sacrifice exists, my simulacrums die, then I die. Because when your simulacrums die, if you remember, the 4-piece bonus is as long as your simulacrums are out, you have 50% damage reduction and you're splitting damage between the other two. If they die, you lose 50% plus you're not sharing damage with the other two. So your damage intake gets amplified so much if they die. So if your health is not constantly topped off, you risk self-sacrificing your simulacrums. And the cast time on this is 120 seconds. So every 2 minutes you can cast one of these unless you're reducing it with some other items in your build here. But in general, if you're taking any kind of potentially lethal damage, you're going to lose your simulacrums and then you're just going to die as you're playing the build. This gets really awkward. So I really wish this would be something that Blizzard takes a look at and actually changes. As it stands now, the self-sacrifice rune is kind of ruining this build for me because your simulacrums can die before you do, which means your simulacrums are dead, which means you're basically dead unless you can immediately recast your simulacrums. So I think that part needs to be thought about. They need to do something with this. I would much rather your final service triggers first, and final service, in case you weren't aware, is your oh shit I'm about to die ability. So when you take lethal damage, instead you take no damage for 4 seconds, yada yada. The thing that's killing it though is that that never triggers because your simulacrums die first. So if final service triggered first, and then the next time final service would essentially trigger self-sacrifice triggers, that would be way better, because then you're not at risk of just randomly dying all the time. Not a fan of that. So that's the one thing that I think really needs to get changed. But let's look at some items. When it comes to items, there's one that makes this build even work in the first place, and that is going to be the Haunted Visions. So Haunted Visions is incredibly important because it now is making a change as of this patch where it's only draining 1% of your max life every second, and your simulacrums last forever. So having your simulacrums last forever is super important. As we mentioned before, your simulacrums are both your damage and your damage reduction. So those two little skelly boys surviving around you is incredibly important. So having them last forever, super great. And they can now also cast Grimseath instead of Skeleton Mage. So if you're running the Grimseath build with this, then that could be something you can use. The Grimseath that they cast will actually help you generate, so there's some synergy there. But Haunted Vision's absolutely required if you're going to want to run this build. Since simulacrums are so important, having them last forever is incredibly important. So Haunted Visions is your must-have if you're trying to run this. Then the other must-have is the Maltorious Petrified Spike. This is giving your Bone Spear just a massive increase in damage, up to 700%. It does make it cost more essence, but it is something that I think is straight up required if you want to run this. You want to be amping your Bone Spear as much as you can. So this is something you're going to want to cube and run it in your weapon slot for sure in Season 21. Then you have a couple of options as far as what you can use for your one-handed scythe. So you have the Trayghoul's option, and you've got the Scythe of the Cycle. Personally, I think Scythe of the Cycle is going to be easier for a couple of reasons. A, the damage increase is higher, and B, to me, it's much easier to manage and maintain. So all it requires to do this increased damage is that your bone armor is active. And even though it says it's reducing the duration of bone armor by 4 seconds, I don't find it's very complicated to keep bone armor up. So just as long as your bone armor is up and you have this cubed, you're getting 2 multipliers for your bone spear on top of your set bonus. So to me, I think Scythe of the Cycle is going to be the big win here. The problem I have with Trayghoul's is that even though it's allowing your Grim Scythe to apply curses like 100% as long as you have the Curse Scythe rune applied, the damage increase isn't as high, and I find that managing all of the curses and actually running up to people and smacking them is pretty complicated and awkward. So to not get as much damage increase, you have to be getting closer to enemies, and you have to be picking Grim Scythe. So it's like, I don't love it. It is viable, but I don't love it admittedly. I'm much more of a fan of the Scythe of the Cycle. It's a little easier to manage, and the damage is higher. But you're going to need one of these two. Either one is going to be fine. The one you definitely need is the Maltorious Petrified Spike. Moving on to other stuff, we also have Reseth's Volition. So Reseth's Volition is pretty cool because you gain damage reduction as long as your essence isn't full. Since we're using Bone Spear here a ton, not having full essence isn't very complicated to do. You can always just cast it more if you need more damage reduction. So this is kind of a nice option. The alternative option is if you find that you're constantly on full essence, is you could run an Aquila Caress, which is going to basically give you the same damage reduction if your resource is constantly full. So you can kind of feel out which one you think makes the most sense. If you feel like you're constantly overly full, then you can use the Aquila Caress. If you feel like you're constantly less than full, you can use Reseth's Volition. It really depends on how you build it. I was running it with a Devour kind of a setup, which would allow me to basically have me constantly full, so Aquila Caress made more sense for me. But I suspect if you're running the Grim Scythe version, you're probably not going to take Devour, you're probably going to want to take something else. And in that case, Reseth's Volition is probably much a better choice because you're going to be constantly spamming, constantly running into danger. So you will be casting more often and casting Grim Scythes, which will mean you will want to use this. The other nice thing with Reseth's Volition is that Skeletal Mages, there's a rune on them that gives you increased attack speed. So increased attack speed is also very, very nice, especially if you're running a Grim Scythe build. So Reseth's Volition, something you want to get a hold of. If not, Aquila Caress, totally great. The other thing that's going to be very important is Crispin's Sentence. So this gets into a situation where you get a damage multiplier across the board as long as the enemy you're hitting is slowed, and you get triple if they're afflicted by any other kind of control impairment. So for me, Crispin's is super important because you're getting yet another damage amplifier here. The thing that I like to do is that on my bone armor, I actually run it with the Dislocation rune. This is going to stun everybody for 2 seconds when you cast it. When they're stunned and you have Crispin's on, they're taking triple the amount. So for me, since I'm constantly running Scythe of the Cycle here, which is constantly trying to make sure that my bone armor is active, and my bone armor every time I use it is stunning everybody, Crispin's is going to be getting triple the bonus versus double the bonus. So that's really, really nice. So Crispin's another damage amplifier, which is super great to make sure you get a hold of. On top of that, we have Dainty's Binding. So Dainty's binding is going to be giving you damage reduction as long as anybody's cursed. This is why on my build I was running an actual Decrepify. If you're running the Grim Scythe version, you'll be using your Grim Scythe to actually be applying the curses. I was manually casting mine. But by having this belt on, you get even more damage reduction, so this is really nice survivability. And then something else you could potentially consider would be something like Mantle of Channeling. This was actually changed this most recent patch because Siphon Blood has now been added to the list of things that works. So if you're going to be casting Siphon Blood a lot, you're going to get increased damage as well as increased damage reduction. So Mantle of Channeling, something else that you could potentially try and build into your setup. Something else I wanted to highlight is how your simulacrums are not necessarily the best companions, and remember, your simulacrums are actually doing triple the damage that you are when it comes to casting Bone Spear. So ideally they would be like, again, like handguns on your side, like little sentries that are always with you. But as you can see in this little demo that I did, if you just blood rush over a wall or something like that, your simulacrums can very easily get caught or mispositioned and they do funny stuff. Then my simulacrums are just shooting bone spears into the wall, and I'm just doing much less damage standing there trying to hit enemies. So when it comes to this build, I wish simulacrums would move with you as you do blood rush, because that's going to increase their effectiveness with this build. Otherwise, they just need to make sure that they path correctly, so that way they're always right up on you. I find that this was also causing a lot of problems with DPS as I was running through rifts and greater rifts. And there you have it, everything super fancy about the new Masquerades of the Burning Crusade set. I think if they can tweak out those issues that we discussed in this video, I think the set will have some pretty solid viability. As far as its damage output, I think it's actually fairly competent. I think it could be increased a little bit more. However, that could potentially be solved if they just make the simulacrums way more sticky. That's going to make the damage way more consistent, and therefore this entire build, this entire set, a lot more viable. But it is going to come down to how they end up potentially fixing this set from how it exists today. So that's all I got for you guys as far as the brand new set and as far as the Necromancer and the PTR. Look forward to future videos. I will talk to you beautiful people in the next one. I love you guys. I'll see you around.